The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the producer and not necessarily those of WKTV Community Media.
Cool. Well, welcome back to Great Lakes Music again. This is Judah Guerra. That song you just heard was called Drained by Joel Ferguson. Joel Ferguson is here in the studio with us. Joel, welcome.
Hello.
To the outside world, the millions watching.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And so for those of you that don't know you, this is what this is about. And this is what we're doing here, is exposing people to the amazing music that's happening through all that you're doing and all that the people in here are doing. So we met 2 years ago. I had the privilege of playing in your awesome studio, Planet Sunday, with a band called Edgeworth that doesn't really play out, but their stuff is on streaming platforms, just called Edgeworth.
Yeah.
But that was a great time.
Yeah, it was super fun.
And yeah, so we should talk about how you got into audio recording too. But since we did some music, maybe we can talk about how you got into music first.
Yeah, I think I was bit very early on by the music bug. I think I was maybe 6, 5 in that range when my parents kind of started me on some Suzuki piano lesson kind of stuff. Where you had like this little package that had some magnets that you had to put on the note, and that had like a little rhythm tapper and flashcards, and so that kind of
guitar.
No, it was just literally. It wasn't really an instrument per se. It was more just like reading and rhythm. Yeah, and then we were in church, and I was obsessed with the organ, and so after church would let out, all the adults would go congregate in the congregation room, I guess we'd call it, and they would leave the church area, and I would always run over and flip on the organ and just sit and kind of pluck out some of these chords, and to hear it come through, that massive sound of the organ in the empty room was just, I was like, oh, this is amazing.
Wow.
And so it started there, and then I had a great aunt that played piano, and she kind of gave me some piano lessons, nothing too serious, but my first obsession was drums. And so I started doing that at age like 10 and got into the drum set. My stepdad was a jazz musician, so I grew up with, interesting.
Like
right?
to hear that.
Yeah, of course. So I grew up with being bombarded with like Weather Report and Miles Davis and, all this kind of music. And he had a reel-to-reel, this was like the late 70s, early 80s. And so grew up with that blasting. And so I wasn't someone who was going to easily fall into simple, super like syrupy pop, because I was so used to hearing some of the complexities of the jazz world. So kind of the first band that really struck a nerve with me was The Police, strangely. And I think it was because with Andy Summers and some of the jazz voicings and things that he did, it kind of made me feel more comfortable, because there was always this stigma to rock musicians with the jazz community.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember being described by an older jazz person as a rock musician one time, and it was very like derogatory.
Yeah.
And so I think part of the reason that the police seemed okay to me was because I think I felt like my stepdad at the time would accept the fact that at least they were doing some things that were, you know, interesting chordally and things like that. And melodically, I think, too, it was a little bit more free than just a simple pop thing. And so from there, I just really stayed focused on the drums. I used to rush home from school, play the drums to the police cassette tapes. We had like a Sony Walkman and a cassette. There was no CDs or anything. And that was my everyday, get off the bus, run up the driveway, get in the basement, play the drums. And I was in a band playing the drums with all older kids. I was the young kid, and it was all, I think I was a freshman, and they were all seniors. They may or may not have introduced me to alcohol. I don't remember if that.
What high school was that?
Cedar Springs High School.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you
went to Cedar Springs High School.
That was kind of far.
Yeah. Out, I mean, it's
From here. We're in Wyoming.
Yeah, it's north. And I didn't stray too far from there being in Rockford. I just moved a little bit closer. I wanted a nice, convenient trip to be able to get into the city and then pop back out again. I still like that. But then everything changed when I was a senior in high school, and somebody gave me a tape by a band called Depeche Mode, and the tape was Black Celebration, and they were going to be in Detroit at Pine Knob, and it was summertime, and I was staying at my dad's, so he was over maybe 20 minutes from where Pine Knob is. So I bought a ticket, went by myself to Pine Knob and saw Depeche Mode. And by myself, and I had been listening to this cassette, and I was just, I mean, that literally changed everything. I knew leaving that concert that what I wanted to do was write music, and that I wanted to be in a band, and I maybe necessarily didn't feel as strongly about the drums anymore. I felt like I wanted to be more compositional, and I wanted a keyboard and a sampler and things to create sounds and to start to build like songs from scratch with like the keyboard as a starting point, because what I saw that you could do with samplers is you could literally do the whole thing yourself. And being from Cedar, there wasn't a wide variety of people that were like-minded with me, you know. Especially because I was into the Police and Depeche Mode and Cedar Springs, not to knock on Cedar Springs, but I mean, it was, the musical diversity was like, do you like Van Halen too?
Yeah.
And AC/DC? Well, then you're cool. You like something else? So there weren't a lot of people there for me to be able to, you know, say start a band with or whatever. So the idea of being able to get this sampler and lay down a drum part and lay down a bass part and lay down a keyboard part and then be able to write the melody and to sing over top of it was just like, oh my gosh, this is revolutionary.
Yeah.
And so I came home from that concert and sold I think I was on my third drum set, gave all that up and just kind of went headfirst into songwriting and kind of getting back into like the piano, and started to fool with the guitar a little bit, but it was never like in the foreground for me for whatever reason in those days, until later I started a band that was with two other friends of mine, Al and Randy, and it was called The Agency. It was all keyboards. And we went to play our first show, and I thought I could just be a singer. And it was literally like Will Ferrell with I'm not really sure what to do with my hands. So show number 2, just like now I'm holding a guitar.
Yeah. So it became comfortable.
Yeah, and so that's where the guitar thing started. And as that band progressed, and you know, we kind of hit our limits, and I felt like I needed to do something different. I met a guy named Pete Dunning, and we started a band called 5 Day Rain, and it was all guitar based. And I spent a lot of time with Pete, learning from Pete. He showed me how to play all the Police chords, and I was a fan of the Smiths, Johnny Marr, same kind of thing, just thinking outside the box guitar-wise, lots of more complex voicings. And we had no YouTube or anything like that, so there was no way that you could just like go, you know, type in, show me how to do that. I mean, you had to sit and listen to a cassette and try to figure it out, which I was horrible. I didn't have a great ear for that. But he did, and so I learned tons and tons of new guitar chords and new approaches to the guitar from hanging out with Pete. And we started 5 Day Rain, and we had a good 4 or 5 year run, and then we kind of hit our limit, and then the kind of next chapter ended up being the Papa Vegas chapter, and that was, later. I was getting to the point where I was starting to have kids. I was really starting to consider that, okay, maybe I've given it enough of a shot and it's time to stop. And so I think I kind of even made a deal with myself that if something doesn't happen, then I think that it's time to stop. And then, of course, that was when we got signed by RCA and EMI. And so,
Yeah.
It's funny how that stuff does. Yeah. You reach the end, and it's a new beginning. And so, yeah.
It really was.
That took us into that chapter. We started this question with, how did I get into music? And so I think I've gone further than that.
I mean, it's so you were playing drums in high school for like 4 years.
Yeah.
And then the sampling thing started. So like where you started after you started experimenting with the sampler, were you starting to like gig and stuff in Cedar Springs, or like when did you start performing? Was it with that first band?
All the first gigs, you'll love this. The name of the first band was Wild Boys with a Z.
Yeah, no, that's my type of party.
Yeah, and we did some shows, but it was like a high school dance thing. We played at the Sparta 4-H fair.
Was this you on drums?
This is me on drums. Yeah. And this, for the most part, this was a cover band. We didn't really do any originals per se, but it was just kind of my introduction into the idea of being in a band, and that always really excited me way more than any kind of a solo thing or being kind of a singer-songwriter on my own per se. Like, I always really liked the gang mentality of the band and having like this group of people that you're all in it together, and so that stuck with me.
Did the stuff like singer-songwriter interest stuff come like economically, for economic reasons?
No. And we were talking before we started rolling about the typewriter, and I said that's interesting because that's like one of the first things that I started to write on. And when I was even before I started to get into drums, I would sit at the typewriter and just write stories. I thought I was gonna, in my mind, I was gonna be like a movie writer. So I always knew I was gonna do some form of writing. But I think that the songwriting thing was mostly compelled by the Police, Depeche Mode, this, like hearing, I mean, I was very exposed to pop music through the radio and being a person who's in a public school system and going to dances and things like that. And there was always an element of that was exciting enough. But then when I heard what bands like the Police and Depeche Mode were able to do melodically and lyrically, that's when I became obsessed with the idea of writing and creating things like that, because it was kind of outside of the box of just a general basic thing. And I think one of the things about Depeche Mode particularly that I appreciate is that, I mean, we have our basic major or minor chords, and that's what we're used to hearing, and that's what we are, our ears pick up on here in the States. That's kind of like our go-to. Yeah. And so what Martin was always really good at in Depeche Mode is throwing in like a surprise chord. And that's kind of a trademark of theirs. And I think that that's one of the things that got me excited about songwriting, is that there could be a little surprise that you weren't expecting. So you're going to start off with this idea of a basic major or minor scale, but then at some point, whether it's right away in the case of some songs or not until the chorus develops, all of a sudden there's what they will call modal interchange or a borrowed chord, where something just kind of hits you and you're like, whoa, that's not supposed to be there, but it's so magical that your arm hair stands up and you get, and I mean, and that was a real phenomenon that used to happen to me more when I was younger, but you'd sit in front of the monitors. It still does, but it's definitely gone down. As you get older, things change. But yeah, your arm hair you'd sit in front of the monitors in the studio, and you hit that spot in the song, you could just watch, and your arm hair would. I mean, that's the kind of thing that was just, you can't replace it with anything else. So, I think that
we could demonstrate that a little bit.
If we hit the right chords, it might happen.
Okay, for sure.
But yeah, so the use of modal interchange, or the whole element of surprise, always just kind of, I think, was the thing that drew me in the hardest. And so I've always, and I didn't understand at the time at all, because I was trained musically more as a drummer than a musician, and so I can read and do anything to do with percussion, but when it comes to like theory, I would say there wasn't a ton of that in my life in the earlier years, and so I just knew that I liked it and I didn't understand it. Strange enough, only maybe in the last 10 years was it explained to me by, there's a guitar teacher at RIT Music, Steve Latansky, who was able to go, because I would always say, I love this song, what do you, he's like, well, it sounds like what you love is modal interchange. And so then he went on to explain to me how it's a borrowed chord and what I'm actually, and he's like, here, listen to this, and I'm like, oh my God. So it's like he figured out this puzzle to me that for half of my life was just like, I don't know what it is about this, but when this happens in the song. And so sure enough, I went back and started reviewing all my songs that were my favorite 100 songs or whatever we'll say, and I think probably 90 of them all use modal interchange.
Yeah,
whether it's Duran Duran or whoever, it's
you
just
gotta
like
put a name to it.
Yeah,
or he gave you a name for it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so then I became more aware of it, but I listened back to the Papa Vegas stuff, and like even the song we were playing earlier, Drained, has it in there. Now I didn't know I was doing it. I just was completely motivated by the arm hair. Like if that's doing it, then that's it.
It's like the spidey sense.
But now that I have a better understanding of it, it's interesting to go back and look at stuff and go, oh wow, so that's what it was. So yeah, the science behind it, I guess.
Yeah.
If you can put science and music together, I don't know.
Oh, definitely.
I suppose a little bit. Yeah.
Definitely go together. I mean, as audio engineer, you probably
see
that.
I've had to do more of that too, but it gets tricky. I mean, you got to be careful.
What was your first? When was your first tour?
The first tour I was on was Papa Vegas, and that would have been '99. And we toured the whole U.S. with a band from Sweden called Kent, and they were huge, Grammy-winning European band over in Sweden, and they were trying to break America. And it didn't necessarily happen. They had a really great following, though, considering they didn't have much of a presence here on radio. I mean, back then your only way in was radio or MTV, and they didn't really have any of that going on yet. But they had just finished a U.S. tour with the Cardigans, who people have probably heard of, and they were the opener for the Cardigans. So that tour built them enough recognition that when they came back 3 or 4 months later with us as their opener, they had some pretty big shows, and so that was a fun tour. And it was certainly, for us, it was a kind of kick in the pants because they were such an incredible band. And again, I don't want to say that we're sheltered in Grand Rapids, and certainly less so now than then, but not having been out in the world a lot, to suddenly have this band come in from Sweden of all places and just get on stage and kick your teeth in night after night after night. We'd go up and do our thing, and then we'd sit and watch them and just be like, oh my God, why are we bothering even trying? Because they were just so much better than us. And so that was motivating again too. And then
that definitely probably helped, though. Yeah,
oh yeah, it definitely lights a fire, we'll say, because you just get so inspired by watching people that are so talented. And they were, they were a 5-piece band, had a huge sound, and they were just super consistent. And they lived hard. I mean, they would be up until the wee hours with their vodka, and they would just come in the next day and kill it again and again and again. They just never had a bad night.
Wow.
And so it was very inspirational.
Do you know if their story a little bit, if it's because they're really, what made them that cohesive?
It's hard to say. They had been together for a long time. They had that gang mentality. They were very much a group. They didn't let in a lot of outsiders. They were kind of maybe private that way. But they also had some great life experiences. I mean, I don't know the story of how they broke, particularly in Sweden, but I know that after they broke, they became fast friends with ABBA, and a lot of these, there were a couple other bands that had some success in America, and Sweden's smaller, and they were from the Stockholm area, and so they would tell us stories about being at parties with ABBA and with some of these other people, and actually sitting at pianos and just hanging out, and you're like, wow.
Yeah.
So to be in the company of people like that for your for your downtime, your fun time has got to be super, helpful, I think, too. Spending your time with ABBA when you're trying to write songs. And, what do you think of this? It's probably a good group of people to bounce some stuff off.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Helpful. But yeah, so, they were great.
I was going to ask, before coming in here, it reminded me when you were talking, maybe that Grand Rapids is less closed. I mean, people, it does say it's growing, but what would you do if social media was a thing back then? Do you think do you think it would have helped you? You think because social media has made people aware of everything, they are starting to go out less too? Like, what's your opinions on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Because with the Sweden band, like it was amazing to me that you said, or Ken, right?
Yeah, Ken.
That they opened for the ABBA and then the Cardigans.
Yeah, Cardigans.
Sorry, they opened for the Cardigans, and they gained enough following on that tour so that when they went out again, that's amazing to me that happened.
Well, and I mean, I think that kind of stuff still happens.
It does.
Like, okay. I think that people go to see their favorite band, and there's an opener sometimes
For
that
sure.
like just you're like, whoa. Mute Math played here like maybe 15 or 12 years ago. I'm gonna definitely date myself. But there was this band from Scotland that was opening for them that was just on tour with them called the Cinematics, and I saw it at the intersection. And I was just like, what? Yeah. And like it was a case where the opener just, to me, blew away the headliner. Yeah. And next thing you know, I'm buying the CD for the Cinematics, and they came back a few years later and watched them again. So I think stuff like that still happens. Which is why it's important to just get out and play as much as you can. But as far as how social media like fits into that, I don't know if I would be a good person to judge. I mean, we literally we'd go to Kinko's and print flyers and we'd post them all over town. That was the only way. And then word of mouth. And so similarly for us back then, what our goal always was to be in touch with the clubs. And anytime a band came through that we felt like we were a good fit for, that was maybe alternative or kind of, in the same genre as us, we just tried desperately to be in touch with the club owner and be like, is there any way, even if it's a 20-minute set? And we always felt, more confident about the idea of playing 5 or 6 of our best songs for 20 or 30 minutes and then getting out. Rather than we want to just play as long as possible until people are just sick of us. And so that was always the thing too. So I don't know, not having grown up with it, I don't know. I think it's so different for like the younger generation that doesn't know what it's like to not have it versus us who grew up without any of it, and now we're kind of using it, and we're marveling at younger people who are like, wow, it's such a great tool. But then the way everything changed while that rose, I think also plays a huge
like
role
COVID
in it.
And stuff.
Yeah, well, no, just like it's in terms of the record business, which was completely owned and ran by labels and radio stations. Well, there was no social media, and those were the empires that kind of dictated what was going to happen. I mean, even in the case of Kent and the Cardigans and all that, those were record labels and radio stations that were deciding whether or not this was going to happen or whether it was going to be good for you or bad for you. You had to plead and you had to make your case with, even after you got a record deal, the radio stations in order to get your music played. I mean, it used to be that they would just pay the radio station to play, and then the government said, well, no, that's illegal, that's called payola. So what did they do? They said, well, what if we give away tickets? So if you play Papa Vegas's song, we'll give you 10 front row seats to the Dave Matthews concert. That's not payola, that's different. Wow. And so all this kind of thing still kind of continued, but then with the rise of the internet and kind of the end of the way things were, at the same time, now social media is picking up. Everything is kind of evolving and changing in a way that I don't know how we would have used it back then because I didn't grow up with it. I'm kind of watching it progress. And while it's extremely helpful and I can see the benefits of it, as the music industry has shifted, I've also seen that it feels like it's a whole new world where there's tons of opportunity, but it also feels a little bit desolated and like it's not as robust as it used to be. And I think that you've seen, like you were just saying, some of the show, the amount of people that are willing to go out and watch shows kind of dropped off, and it seemed like COVID definitely. Hurt that.
Yeah.
And then when it started to open back up, it seemed like it got fun again for a second, and then it kind of leveled back off again.
Yeah.
And now I think we're just kind of starting to see where it's going to go. I think that again, there's a ton of potential.
Yeah.
But I don't know where it's going to go. I'm enjoying watching. Yeah.
In terms of your experience with that, like, because we could talk about the industry, like why it's changed, but like maybe we could also talk about like specifically, like, because you played with, I mean, you until 2 years ago you said Verve Pipe, and that's, as people know, international success and has millions of streams of Spotify, and something Spotify probably came after when y'all started.
Oh,
so
there was no Spotify.
So it's cool that, you know, you can upload music there and there's still a huge following. So obviously you guys are huge. So how have you guys, and you've seen that change through that band in terms of like the industry, in terms of what you guys were trying to appeal to, and I don't know, like the industry?
I think with Verve Pipe, and that was for me 2001 to 2000, I don't know, 2021, somewhere in towards the end of the pandemic. I just the Brad kind of wanted to come back, and the studio for me had gotten really busy, and so I kind of decided it was a good time for me to just focus on the studio and kind of maybe get off of the touring thing so much. But I think that the philosophy in that band has never really changed. And that was one of the things that I kind of liked about it. Like, we didn't think, what do we have to do differently now? I mean, we got dropped in 2002 or 3, I want to say, from RCA, and we just kind of naturally started doing stuff on our own. And so we were kind of doing the do-it-yourself thing, whether it was, you know, we would obviously hire an engineer or somebody to fulfill that role.
How many
in the early days until I started doing recording, but then we did the last 3 records at my studio.
Yeah.
But we always kind of, I think that was just a very natural progression for us because we didn't have a label anymore, but we weren't going to stop, so we just kept going.
What was your following like in when you got dropped?
What was the band's following like?
Yeah.
It was still pretty good. I mean, we didn't have social media to look at to give us actual numbers, so it's kind of hard to say. We had a mailing list, if you can believe that.
Yeah, I can believe it.
So your only barometer was like you'd go out and play shows, and
Yeah.
it's, you know, in certain places like bigger markets, you'd have, you know, huge crowds. You might go somewhere and all of a sudden it's small again, and so you just would kind of learn to focus on where people had the most interest, and then to just continue to be active and constantly putting things out and trying to constantly create so that you have new stuff for people to listen to. Yeah.
I was thinking about Drain too.
Yeah.
And kind of how that song talks about your negative experiences with touring. Is that right? Like,
I wouldn't say it's the negative side of it. It's definitely, and I don't think this is true anymore. This is another thing that's changed possibly for the better, is that as a society, I think we've just naturally become more health conscious. But you have to remember that for those early tours, smoking had not been outlawed in any way, shape, or form. The social norm was to stay up and drink and party. And so when you're on the road in a band like that, there's a certain expectation that's put on you by the label, obviously, radio stations, the DJs that are playing your music. They're going to come to your show. You're going to want to be friends with them. You're going to want to get along. They expect you to go out and have a good time. And so it was very typical when you're on the road for a month to literally every single night you'd be up, you know, having drinks after the show until 1, 2 in the morning, get in the van or the bus the next morning, drive to wherever you're driving
Yeah.
and kind of do it again. And so that whole rinse and repeat of punishing your liver, getting up in the morning and having to do radio interviews and seem lively, I mean, that starts to wear on you. And I think that song was just kind of a reflection of the idea of, I just can't, you start to hit your limit at like, okay, I'm just tired of this feeling, always feeling like garbage. And then we go to do this show. And so it was just kind of a reaction to that. But I think that, again, as a society, we've kind of stepped away from a lot of that stuff. I mean, it's much cooler now to be healthy. You find backstage in the green room, there's water and fruits and vegetables. I mean, back then it was just vodka and beer.
Yeah.
And God knows what else. And then, but yeah, I mean, everybody smoked, everybody just drank. It was just, yeah. So I think that song was just kind of a reflection of the hard, if there can be a hard part to having to be on the road and play music, which sounds like your dream, and it is. But I mean, there can be a dark side to it that's easy to get sucked into too. Or there was more so back then, I would say. I mean, it's still possible now, I'm sure.
Probably, yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
I haven't talked to anyone that would know.
Yeah, it seems to be less common now, I would say. People seem to have their stuff together a little bit more. But yeah, back then we were a little less wise as a society. We were only 20 years removed from doctors being on television talking about how camels are good for you.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So yeah, it was just different. But yeah, I certainly think it's better now.
Because I was just wondering,
less of a thing
for younger musicians that want that. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I'd like to go on tour one day.
Yeah.
And but it's like learning how to be wise and with that, and trying to learn from people that have done that thing. Also, like traveling itself probably is taxing. Like going from like all those miles that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly added to my decision to kind of step back from it for a second. And I mean, we weren't doing anything like what we used to do. We would go out for a week or two at a time. But the routing, plays a role. And so a lot of the driving that we would do would be, 10-hour drives. And we were in a Sprinter van for the most part. And so you're sitting up, sometimes with a neck pillow or your head against the window. And if you do that every day for 7 or 8 days straight, drooling on yourself, after a while you're like, you know what, I think I'd rather be home recording.
Yeah.
But the shows are always, that's the thing that's tough to give up. I mean, that's the reason that you go through all the other stuff is for the shows. The shows are just magic, fun. It's the whole. Yeah.
It's like the dope, it reminds you why you're doing it.
Exactly, yeah. Yep, it gives you the rush, it gives you the arm hair standing up, it's the energy, so it's a lot of doing other things to get that hour and a half or hour and 40 minutes of that rush. And so I just think it's a game of, as long as you're cool with the other 12 or 15 hours of stuff that you've got to go through to get that, then keep doing it. But for me, I was just at a point where I think it's time to just I mean, I get as much enjoyment and probably more out of the creation process, as we've talked about. Like the writing was the thing that kind of always first sparked me. And so there's enough of that, in the studio that I feel kind of fulfilled doing that. So.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering about that. So now I guess we can talk about that process, a little bit, but then also like the other side on the recording aspect. Did that come in after touring then?
Well, okay, so the recording.
Obviously touring and recording. But
the recording thing came by necessity as a songwriter. So I was always a songwriter first, whether I was doing it from a keyboard or from a guitar or from wherever it came from. I knew that I wanted to do the writing. So I always had either just a simple cassette recorder was how it started. Then I gradually moved up to a 4-track cassette. And so...
When was this?
This would have been in my early 20s.
Okay.
So 4-track cassettes were, they were a little pricey to get some of the nicer ones, but if you really wanted to do it, then that's what you did. And so I started recording on those. And that was mostly to make demos. And so just to get ideas down. It became like a sketch pad. But since I was always doing that, eventually, when Papa Vegas got signed and we found ourselves over in England, the idea was I would just record the demos for us to send, because they sent us to England for 3 months to live and to
Oh, really?
to write some songs and stuff. We had half the album probably done, but they're like, look, it would be a great story for you guys to just go over, live there for 3 months just south of London. We'll get you this rehearsal space that kind of has a recording studio, which was a big mixing board with 3 ADATs, which are these VHS tapes that record
So wait,
digital.
real quick, is RCA a Michigan label?
No,
Okay.
no, it was a national label. They're
Okay.
based in New York and have
Based
offices
in New York, okay.
Los Angeles. Yep.
Okay.
Same one that's still, I think they're still around, but for a while, their name was RCA, meant Recording Cemetery of America.
Damn.
Or bands went, but no, that's an old joke. But anyways,
Yeah,
so
they
yeah, they
track
sent us
you.
there, and that was kind of where I really had to learn quickly how to engineer and record and mix, was for the demo making process of that band. And then when we got back and did Hello Vertigo and went on tour with Kent, and we were starting to prepare to do the second record, what they would traditionally do is they'd send you into the studio periodically to demo the new 6, 4, 8, whatever, however many songs you had. So the record company would be like, here's, $4,000. We'll just throw a number out there. $4,000. Go to the local studio, record these demos, and then we'll check them out and see what we think, and we'll, all together we'll pick the best songs or whatever and move forward. So there was a band at the time called Failure, and they famously took their recording budget, which was maybe, $200,000 for their album, and they talked the label into letting them buy recording gear and do it themselves in a house. And I'm reading this story and I'm like, wow, that's a really good idea. So I said to RCA when we were getting ready to start the demo process for the second record, hey,
Yeah.
what if instead of throwing $4,000 at the local studio, we buy this 16-track digital recorder and a few mics, because we have this really great rehearsal space, and I'll just make the demos for free.
Wow.
And then we can send them in. And so that's, I think, really when it started, because then I was making and felt responsible, because I had talked them into doing this, and then we're like, oh, we're not going to go to a big studio. Now it's up to you. Make it sound good.
Yeah.
And so that's where I really started to cut my teeth as more of an engineer. And then from there, we got dropped. The Verpipe thing started. I was still trying to do, I started another band called Miles to Mars, and I recorded that entire CD. CDs were, a thing then, from the basement. And other people heard that, and they were like, oh, wow, could you record our band? And so then that kind of snowballed into, I was moonlighting as a recording engineer, producer, and that just kind of led us to where we are now.
Yeah.
So I just kept getting more and more clients that I was bringing into my basement whenever I had downtime to record their albums, and I started to get more and more excited about that process, because I think producing and songwriting are kind of similar, yet they have the same goal. You're trying to create something in any way that you can embellish it or make it better. You're working as a team, so it's very much like being in a band. You're collaborating, and so there were a lot of attractive elements to that allowed me to kind of. I was never a super social person to begin with. I was always kind of introverted, which is why the road was maybe a more dangerous place, because it's uncomfortable. So it's easier to get sucked into maybe having an extra drink so that you can just kind of relax. And so the idea of being at home and being able to be in a controlled environment where I don't feel the pressures of trying to please the DJ or please the record label guy was very enticing to me. And so I just gradually kind of took over, and I really became more obsessed with that than maybe playing live so much. So that was the kind of the
music survival.
The transition.
People don't know about.
The transition was that for sure. And then my wife and I looked for a property that had an unattached building, and ended up finding the place that we're at now. And I hired Glenn Brown, who's kind of a famous producer from Lansing, and he's a studio designer, incredible acoustician. all around just genius.
Yeah, legend.
Hired him to make the designs and help me set up the control room to get it nice and flat. And yeah, just no looking back after that. Yeah. I was it was a little bit nerve wracking because there's a lot of studios in Grand Rapids. There didn't used to be back in the day, but now there's a holy host of excellent places, excellent people. So that's another thing that's kind of really changed. I mean, the amount of choices that you have as an artist for recording is like crazy to me now. In the early, mid, late 90s, there was one studio in Grand Rapids that was the main studio, which was Station C.
Station C.
Yeah, which it was right down on Wealthy Street. And there were a couple other smaller ones, but I mean, that was really like everybody that was making a CD that was serious, like went there.
Huh.
And now there's like dozens and dozens and dozens.
Yeah.
So it's just,
There's a lot.
Again, these are all things that I think are helpful, and it's fun to watch the growth of it. So
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it does help. Because that is one goal of the podcast, is like for people that are thinking about putting out music to get knowledge in terms of like, you can start right now. You can do it. Because you have all types of people coming in your studio, like all types of genres.
Yeah.
Did it used to just be like a certain type of genre?
I would say that it probably started more that way, although I don't know. I mean, I've done so many different things in my life. When I was, before even Papa Vegas started, and I think I was telling you, I always had kind of recording devices. Well, one of the first ones I had was a 4-track reel-to-reel. And I was living at my dad's in the Detroit area, and he owned a restaurant. And I was still writing this was the agency, so it was my couple of friends and I, we were the all keyboard band. But I had this 4-track reel-to-reel in the basement, and my dad owned a restaurant, and I worked at the restaurant as a busboy, dishwasher sometimes, and became fast friends with a lot of the other people that worked there, and had met 4 or 5 rap artists from downtown Detroit. And they were like, wait a minute, you have the stuff to record? And so I would end up driving some of these guys from the restaurant to my dad's house out in Rochester, and we'd go in the basement and from between like midnight and 2 in the morning and record. We're trying to be quiet because my dad and the kids are way upstairs sleeping. We're down in the basement recording rap tapes, because I don't even think I guess there were CDs, but you just didn't put out CDs unless you had a lot of money. Yeah. And so we were making cassettes. But yeah, we'd make rap cassettes, and then I'd have the scary thing, I had to drive these guys back sometimes at like 2:30 in the morning, and some of them would live like way downtown, like by the old ballpark. Yeah. And there'd be gangs of people just standing in the street, and it's just me at 3 in the morning trying to go home, going, hi.
Do you remember, did any of those guys make it?
Did any of them make it? That's a great question. None of them obviously made it huge, or I'd be going to their parties and stuff. Yeah. But yeah. But I still remember,
Detroit rap's rich.
Yeah.
Got a rich history.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. That's. So, anyways, my point being, I've always done it on some level. Yeah. And I'm sure if I went back and listened to some of that stuff, I'd cringe now. Yeah. Just at how it was, all tape based, and it was probably dirty, and it was. But now that stuff comes around and it's cool sounding all of a sudden. Oh yeah. We're trying to get, now that we have all this clean headroom and this great recording technology, we're trying to add the dirt back in and get the grime back in. Because yeah. So
true.
Yeah, that's interesting too. How things are cyclical, and sometimes super clean audio is fashionable, and then other times it lo-fi kind of stuff, and yeah. In the jazz world, it tends to stay pretty clean, right? Like, there's not really like a thing where they're like, I wanted a little bit of dirt on it, or I want it to sound a little garagey or do it yourself. Usually, you want it to be pretty pristine, I imagine, right?
Yeah, I talk about this with my friend. We both like the older recordings of jazz, and.
Now, is that vinyl?
Not necessarily more just the year, not even necessarily, even so if you go on Spotify. So it's not the process,
it's just the actual, the content itself.
Yeah. So it's like the liver sounding
Yeah.
recordings, especially. Even like if today's records that are live, I like better than
Yeah.
like the cleaner, like the really polished sounds of jazz that are coming out in all the major New York studios
Right.
and stuff. But
Yeah.
it's also over time I've gotten used to it, and so like Dave Brubeck's like Time Out. I'm sure you've heard
Oh, yeah.
Take Five. Like
Oh,
that to me is like I wish all albums sound like that.
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
that was a Rudy Van Gelder though. So that's like,
I wonder like what the implications of technology have been on jazz recordings in terms of like in pop recordings. It's kind of crazy how we've been able to perfect and over perfect, say, to where everything is so editable now. And
quantizing.
yeah, you can literally fix everything. I wonder, like, is jazz do people have that same kind of mindset going into it, or are they more relaxed and just want to get a take and leave it alone?
Yeah, I don't know.
Not sure.
The jazz I've done in Grand Rapids, the producer Deborah Perry, she's awesome.
Yeah.
You know Deborah?
Oh man, she used to come into the music store where I worked all the time.
Oh really?
Love her, yeah.
Yeah, I love Deborah. It's like my aunt. But
Yeah, that's awesome.
she does she's done a lot of jazz for us, and it's been really great. And so we just I don't think we use
That's
a
someone you
metronome.
should have on
We
the
just play
podcast.
jazz. Yeah, we're getting her on
Oh,
soon. Her and
nice.
her brother
Great.
do some stuff. So that'll be cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the whole technology part of it's gotten so weird. Excuse me, I gotta take a drink.
Oh yeah, get some agua.
Yes, I'm getting that dryness. I was talking about just the other day the fact that now that we have the monitor, the screen,
Yeah.
it's just got to be weird, especially for younger people, to think about not having that. And like, so the way that we all came up, there was never anything to look at.
Basically, like you're always being recorded. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Oh.
The idea of the production now, we're getting back into the production of music where you can actually see the music on a monitor.
Okay.
So you're recording and you're looking at this
Oh,
thing.
my bad.
You're
Yeah.
constantly looking at this thing you're getting all this visual feedback, whether you're looking at levels
Sound
or whether
waves,
you're
yeah.
looking at melodyne, a pitch correction thing, or you're looking at music and you're looking at it and and so now you're able to perfect it visually as well as like auditorial. And so it's interesting to think about if you were to take that away and there is nothing and you're just hitting record and you're sitting there and you're listening because that's the way it always used to be.
Yeah.
You weren't able to just go in and get this visual cue where you're able to like, okay, I see that. Because I've had clients as I'm going through and say working on a vocal or something. And I'm kind of going through it. And I'm listening to it, and I'll only try to react if I hear something that bites my ears. I'm like, oh, that's a little flat or that's a little sharp. But I can't tell you how many times somebody's sitting over my shoulder and they notice that it's 10 cents flat or 10 cents sharp. Oh, will you get that?
Wow.
And I'm like, well, no, just listen to it. Don't just look at it. Just listen, because if it's not bothering you, then let's not add that thing that it doesn't need. But people start to get hung up on this visual thing that we never had before. So it's interesting how that kind of plays into it too.
Yeah. No, that's one thing I did appreciate when we recorded Edgeworth. So everyone that were looking to record music, go to Planet Sunday. But was that your level of expertise and like with that wisdom with just like I'd be recording bass and like it can be very easy. Well, especially because I didn't know the music that well because I had just met those guys like that.
Yeah, it was kind of a new thing for you, so you were kind of
and recording as a young bass player. It was just like I'm still young, but they're just like making mistakes and stuff like that. But to have when I would have an okay take, but to have like the assurance, like that was good, like let's move on. I'm like to have that wisdom of it and of someone that's done it before, whether it even doesn't have to be an engineer though, but
right,
or a producer. But
well, good. I'm glad you felt comfortable.
I was really happy about that. Yeah,
that's important. That's important because you don't want to be freaked out. That's an easy place to get freaked out.
Yeah,
in the
I was
studio.
freaked out, man. I was like, this is like I'm not I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, no,
I'm just playing C and
yeah,
D and E.
what you want is it to be a place that just feels very natural and very home, and you don't feel any kind of nerves. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you want to push out of the way if you can help it. And so we try, and so there's always an element of it that's different because it's a studio, and so it's got to be laid out a certain way to achieve the result that you want to achieve. But you try to make it as comfy and homey as possible, and get the lighting so that it can just kind of feel a little bit more chill and not so uptight. But then when you're trying to get a really good sound, there's certain things that need to be uptight for you to. So yeah, it's just trying to get a good balance of it, and I think it does a fair enough job. So I'm glad that you felt that it was comfortable. That's good.
One thing I did want to ask you.
Yeah.
And this is more related to because you've done all these different things, but you've been able to like succeed and really focus on them. And this is personal for me, 'cause sometimes I feel like doing a lot. I'm trying to do a lot, but then I can get distracted. And so with this, and it reminded me when you were doing the audio, how that developed over time, and it just kind of like when you did it, you naturally like focused on it, but then it just kept growing through there, and then you would focus on it more. And I'm assuming what it sounded like, while it was like you weren't like opposing it, but was it one day you weren't like, I want to be an audio engineer? Like it just kind of like developed. Is that what it sounds like? And so these things that develop comparatively to the things that you want to do, the goals, like how do you like, or maybe give advice on making sure you're not doing a lot and the stuff that you're doing is actually helpful to your goals. Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, that's a great point, because I went through so many changes that I would have never seen coming, that if you would have asked me when I was in my 20s, do you ever think that you'll play the bass in this band? No, never. I'm a songwriter. I'm a singer-songwriter. That's what I do. And then at some point when I'm playing bass in some band, do you think that you're ever going to just be a producer and just kind of record other people? Well, no, never.
Yeah.
And so
Exactly.
I don't think it's let me walk that back, because I always had a specific goal in mind, and it was always to achieve success as a songwriter. And I did that, I guess, to an extent. And sometimes I try to sell myself short of what it was. It was pretty big to be from Cedar Springs and then to have signed a record deal with RCA and a publishing deal with EMI. I mean, that was pretty
Unheard of.
unheard of, yeah. But then to keep it going, once you get in, once you achieve that thing, and then it maybe starts to, pull back a little bit, and you look to the next door, and you see, okay, well, there's an opportunity for me to maybe stay in the music business if I want to go through this other door, which is now maybe I'm going to play the bass in this band, and I'm going to take on bass. I'd never really considered bass. And so in some ways it's insulting to bass players everywhere that some kid that played the keyboards, drums, and guitars is now going to be a bass player in this band. But I had to audition. I mean, I went and auditioned, and fortunately I had just enough to squeak through to land that gig. And then that led me on a whole other journey where now I'm a musician in a band, and I'm looking at things completely different. I don't have any control over the songwriting. Fortunately, Brian on the last 3 records has let everybody contribute, so I've always got a song of mine. But again, it was written for me, and I was going to sing it, and in fact, I did sing a lot of them, and they were demos. And then we ended up just kind of using the demos and then having Brian re-sing them, and we added some more production to them maybe. But in the band as a bass player now, I'm like, oh, this is a different experience. And so I was able to see the same kind of things that Papa Vegas was doing now from a different perspective. And I grew to appreciate being just a musician in the band, where I didn't have all of that weight of being the person that everybody looks to, having to be the mouthpiece for the band, which I was never very good at, and Brian was always great at. I mean, one of the most humbling things for me was when after the Kent tour, Papa Vegas toured with the Verpipe. We opened for them, and I would have to go do radio in the morning with Brian. And I mean, everyone that knows Brian knows that he's just extremely extroverted, super just, when he walks into the room, everybody wants to talk to him. And I've just never been like that. And so I would have to sit in the radio station and he would just take over the interview like always and have these great stories. And I would just be like, oh my God, I want to go back to the hotel. I'm so bad at this. And so being the bass player in the band turned out to be a spot that I didn't think I wanted to be in, that I actually really started to enjoy the being anonymous kind of, and being able to still get up in the gang, have my piece of the action in terms of playing, feeling that energy and just the electricity that you feel when you're playing a show and the band's killing it and you're just doing, everything's firing on all cylinders. But then a complete relief from the pressure of having to be, the communicator and tell the stories between songs and all the stuff that I was, as an introverted person, just kind of terrified of. I could just stand on the stage and wait while Brian talks about the next song. And so there was, that was a whole new thing that I didn't even realize that I would end up liking. But then it was also challenging for people to come up to me and go, "Oh, you're the bass player from the Verpipe." And I was like, oh, yeah. And just kind of forget about all the other stuff. And so, and now it's like, oh, you're that producer or that engineer guy. And so it's just kind of shedding of the old skin and moving forward. But it's always with the same goal, to stay involved somehow in the thing that you love. And so I think the great thing about music is there's all these parts to it. And you can start off, dead set on this one thing, and you may find that you get that and that makes you happy. But you may also find that it moves to over here just by necessity sometimes, not even because you wanted to. And maybe you find that you actually love this and you didn't even know that you did. And then by necessity, you move to this next thing. And so it's just, I think, important to always just love what you do. And if you're ever doing something that you don't love, then that's when it's time to walk away, maybe. And so I've just been super fortunate that all the doors that I've kind of went from this door to that, or that have always ended up being something that I was like, I could find beauty in, or that I could obsess over or be very happy or excited about. And then, sometimes things just kind of reach their natural ending. And I think for me, at the point that I was at in my life 2 years ago, when the chance came up to just kind of walk away from the touring thing, I did. And I wouldn't say that there aren't days that I kind of regret it, because I certainly miss, like, again, that electricity of the live show. But maybe that means it's going to force me to open some other door, which could be I start another project or I get involved in some other thing, which that's exciting. I mean, that's exciting. I'm super stoked for that.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess one thing I was going to say, so you said do the things you love. So the things, but it also sounded like that you needed to do the audio because people were asking you to. So did you find ways to love it then?
I didn't. I would say the great thing about the way I went into that was that I never did it because someone needed me to.
Okay.
It was strictly word of mouth through friends who I had immense amount of respect for. Like, one of the first projects that I got to do was with a band called Bowery, and that's Phil Coulis, and it was Shanae, and it was a incredibly well written kind of stuff that was exactly everything that I loved about music. So again, it was like, it wasn't out of necessity that I was doing that. It was like, oh my God, do I get to do this? Yes. Okay, let me do this. And I wasn't even that good at it, honestly, because I had made demos and things like that for my band, but I hadn't actually made someone's record, and I didn't know anything about hi-fi. I remember when we were recording vocals for Hello Vertigo in Los Angeles at NRG Studios, the engineer, we were testing mics, and they set up 4 or 5, fancy Neumann microphones, and they had me sing the first verse into all 5, mics. And we went back and sat in the control room, and they said, all right, let's pick which mic is the best.
Yeah.
and they would sit and they would, cycle through the different mics. And I was just like sitting there like, are you guys messing with me? Because I couldn't hear any difference at all. When you're not trained and you're not obsessed with that kind of thing, I'm hearing the pitch inaccuracies in my voice, and I'm hearing my voice, which I don't like. And I'm just going, you guys are nuts. There's no difference in these mics. And they're like, you can't hear that. And they would switch it. They would get so frustrated with me. And I'm like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. And now here I am at 53, and I'll put up 2 or 3 mics, and I'll just be like, wow, that sounds so different. So it's just, again, at that point in my life, I was obsessed about singing and songwriting, and I had no intention of it. And so it was a slow progression to when I was recording other people. I'm sure that when we threw up microphones when I started recording, I'd be like, I don't know. Does it sound good? I was more obsessed about the song, and I think that that's a good thing. I think that it's always good to have some of that too. But now, as I've gotten older and been doing it more and more and more, I've certainly started to obsess about the sounds. Hopefully, not too much. Hopefully, I know how to stay out of the way. There was a great chapter in the Rick Rubin book that just came out.
Oh, wow.
It's an incredible book, and I highly recommend it. But one of the chapters that really struck me was called Beginner's Mind. And ironically, the morning that I read it, the day before I was in a session, in a session with a band, and we had been working on this song, and we kind of were at our wits' end with the song. We had tried mixing it, remixing it, adding more things. We were just it wasn't quite working, and they suddenly got the idea to start doing a bunch of really weird filtering and some stuff that I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, we're going backwards. We're ruining the song now. It was bad enough that we couldn't figure it out before. I think that it was better 4 iterations back, and so for the whole 4 hours after we started going down this road, I was just kind of going, I was like dark siding, we'll call it, where I was like, this is not, we're making the song worse. I don't like any of these. The next morning I get up and I read this chapter in the Rick Rubin book, and it's called Beginner's Mind. And so it talks about one of the early computer programs that somebody made. How they taught computers to play chess. And so somebody taught the computer to play this Chinese board game called Go. Did you read this chapter?
Oh,
okay.
I got to check this book out.
And so they, teach the computer starts playing itself. It goes through it thousands of times. It learns how to be really good at Go. And so now we're going to put it against the world champion of Go. And so the world champion and the computer start to go at it. The world champion wins the first 2 games. Game 3 comes up. They get to the 30th move or whatever. And everybody that's a professional at the game knows that as a defensive strategy at this particular moment in the game, the computer has to either do this move, or as an offensive strategy, it has to do this move. These are the only 2 choices. And it does something completely different and ends up winning that game, and then never loses to the guy again.
Oh my!
And so Rick Rubin's point was, don't think that because you know so much, because you've accumulated so much experience or knowledge, that some crazy, weird, bizarre idea that shouldn't work might not be the most perfect answer in that scenario. And I was reading this the next morning, and I was like going, oh my God.
Dang.
And the other day I had just been so guilty of thinking, I already know that this isn't going to work, and and I just had to kind of shut myself up. And so there are so many great things in this book that are, if you're a creative person that enjoys it, that you got to read it. There's just so many great chapters like that. But that just kind of woke me up, and I'm like, reminded me that, you know what?
Yeah.
Every idea is valid, and you got to try and follow through every single thing. Don't just go thinking that because you've tried this one thing before in your life that it's not going to work. It could be the exact thing that the song needs. And so, yeah.
Dang, that applies for everything.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. You can take that philosophy to everything.
And I will.
Yeah.
I'll write that down. Dang. So, vision for future music?
Yeah. I've started talking a bit, and talk is cheap. So we'll see. But I have not stopped writing.
Okay.
I have folders and folders on my hard drives of songs, in various states, probably more than enough to make a double album.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I just haven't felt the need to put it out because maybe on some small level, songwriting to me has always been kind of my own therapeutic thing that I have done for me. And at one point when I was young and ambitious, it felt like it was the most important thing to try to put it out and be super successful as a creator. And then as I progressed through it, I started to appreciate what it does for me mentally is just as important, if not more. So it's enough for me to sometimes complete a song, mix it, listen to it, put it away and move on and do it again, because I think it's that process that really excites me the most still. But that being said, now that I've taken a break from touring and haven't had the ability to play, I have definitely been getting an itch to do something. And so I've been talking to several people about starting a project of some sort. So we'll see. We'll see if it actually happens. I think there's a strong chance it will. It's just I have to make time for it, because in the studio I tend to stay real busy, and like I said, that also cures a lot of those itches because you're so deeply involved in these projects that you just don't have a ton of energy left to give to something else afterwards. That's good. That's what I think that's what I love about it. It still consumes all of my heart. It's not like I'm just kind of half-assing it in there, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see what the future
I'll
holds.
be on the lookout.
Yeah?
For sure.
Oh,
I've heard that.
well, we're going to get you in the studio is what I hear.
Oh, yeah, tomorrow,
I might
I
have
think.
you as in for some trombone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be
That'd
exciting.
be cool.
Yeah.
Is he doing? So people know your whole family's musical,
My whole
which
family.
I think
We're like
is
the Partridge
awesome.
family.
Yeah.
In fact, that's one of the iterations that we're talking about, maybe doing like a family
Yeah.
band where we go through and play some of my library from the older stuff to the middle stuff to the newer stuff, and have some guests, but then have Marley, Miles, and Camden all playing in some form or another. Yeah.
So Mrs. Ferguson doesn't play. She just sing.
I think that we could try to talk her into it.
Okay. Cool.
She sings, yeah, but she's just usually like, she would rather watch. She'd probably be out there taking pictures
Yeah.
of the kids.
The groupie.
Yeah.
That's good. Need one.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so Cam's releasing an album. See.
He's been doing some singles too, yeah. So
Okay.
Marley and Miles have been busy in low phase, and he's started a solo called 60.
Okay.
And yeah, he's got, I
Like
think
that's
he's
his
got,
artist name?
yeah.
Okay, 60.
Yeah, and he spells it SIX and then TEE.
Ooh. 60.
But it's kind of a cool thing. It's an homage to my dad, his grandpa, and that was his number. He played ball for Central Michigan football, and his number was 60. And so he recently passed away, and so I think that's why Camden's using it for
That's awesome.
kind of a take on his number. That's cool.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I think actually thinking about it, I don't know if I knew that Cam was your son
Yeah.
playing with you, because I met him in the Grandpa's Youth Symphony,
Yeah.
and that's how we met. That was like 2018.
And then you guys actually even did a year at State, right? When he was in the music program, or no? Or you just
Actually, he was in the year before me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So
Oh, that's
Small
right.
world.
Yeah. Yeah.
small world, and
It always blows my mind how small it really is.
yeah, people are getting connected, and
Yeah.
always end up getting connected. I feel like if you're really diving into it, you'll get connected, like with somebody
Yeah.
in GR.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's a tight knit community, really. I mean, yeah. It seems like everybody kind of knows everybody, that's what's kind of cool about it.
Yeah, we had Nathan Walton and Mac last
I
week.
just saw him the other day at the
So-
music store. He was he was in buying strings. I got a chance to talk to him. Yeah.
You work at a music store? Is that what you said?
I have always worked part-time for RIT Music. Is just kind of where I grew up.
Okay.
When Papa Vegas got signed in the late 90s, I had been working there for 3 or 4 years. And then obviously I stopped for years and years and years doing that. But then as a way to ensure that I don't work 7 days a week in the studio, which would be easy for me to do because I just love it, I work every Monday at RIT Music, and that's my day off. The studio is closed on Mondays. No Mondays.
Okay.
So Mondays I'm at RIT. And yeah, Nathan came in to buy some guitar strings, so I got a chance to talk to him.
Yeah.
So that was cool. Yeah.
That was my first time meeting him too, and that'll come out like probably Friday or something.
Yeah.
But cool guy.
Super cool.
He's awesome.
Yeah.
Funny.
Yeah.
So one last thing.
Yeah.
I want to close with. It's the big question. How do you make it in music? Like what's advice to say to a younger musician? I guess it would be West Michigan themed. You said you could keep it like that. Let's keep that in mind.
Well, I think kind of like what we've maybe covered is
Definitely,
the thing to keep in mind is that where you end up may not be where you're starting to look. But that being said, if you maintain an open mind and have a massive heart and truly do love the work, maybe love the work more than the idea of the outcome, I think that's an important distinction, that you love the work more than the possibility of the outcome, that you will land in a place where you're meant to be, and you will thrive and you will love it. So yeah, I think that's how you make it.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's this thing where you're kind of dreaming of being famous, or it's this other thing, then I won't say that never happens for people, because I think that can too, but I think that won't be as meaningful as if it's something that you just are really, really passionate about. And I think that part of the reason that will translate more is because since you're so passionate about it, you will have the aptitude and the ability to wrap your arms around the bit that you end up in. And so that's been true for me, I think. I've, as we've kind of talked about, I've been able to go from this position to that position and constantly kind of feel smitten with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much for your time.
And thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Hopefully I made some sense.
Oh, for sure.
Interviewing is not my strength.
I couldn't tell. I feel the same way, honestly. But people,
us
I know
introverts
people are going
gotta
to be
stick together.
Yeah. And people are going to be touched by this, I think, because I had a really good time talking to you and just learning a lot about music. And the first one, the feedback was like people were just getting really encouraged or interested on just the person's life and career, and and that's the thing we're keeping going with. So
cool.
I think it's our first guest, the only one that's out. It didn't grow up in Michigan, so I think it will be cool for people to hear like the homegrown guy and all your experiences in these borders. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Judah.
For sure. Yeah, everyone go check him out. Joel Ferguson, playing it Sunday, Papa Vegas, Verve Pipe. We're out of here.
Woo!
Adios. Davin's probably finally.
Finally, that was too long. Too long.
The opinions expressed in the preceding program are those of the producer and not necessarily those of WKTV Community Media.